I've been talking about the changing times a fair bit recently, and if you needed any further indications, I present to you Kotaku, almost defending Starship Troopers. Almost. You know, they got close, but then stumbled at the final hurdle again and started calling it fascist. Yes, as one would expect. Helldiver's 2's success is making everyone watch this misunderstood movie. See, Starship Troopers have kind of become the layman's, oh, I am very clever and media literate sort of movie, without any of them actually understanding it, which is the funny part, as even this is, well, this entire article is basically the standard template construct of you didn't understand Starship Troopers movie article. In fact, there's one literally identical to it from 2013. 10 years ago. Except for the folks on Helldivers 2, I guess, which is apparently very, very popular and is making people watch Starship Troopers, which is good, because Starship Troopers is good, but Helldivers is popular, and I don't like popular things, so I'm going to continue ignoring that for a while longer. Instead, let's talk about this article here, shall we? The confusion was at least well-founded. Starship Troopers is very loosely based on the novel of the same name, written by Robert A. Heinlein, and that book's politics are ambiguous. No, the book's politics are not particularly ambiguous at all. In fact, they are very, very clearly laid out in front of you. But see, here's where the problem arrives when one tries to be a media-literate individual in the current year. If you only know of two political positions, far left and far right, then anything in between, or that differs ever slightly from these two, communism or Nazism, is apparently very difficult to define. Which I find just goddamn hilarious as well, because, no, Starship Troopers, the books, politics, are very libertarian, extremely libertarian, bordering on anarcho-capitalism libertarian, okay? As the state itself is tiny and bound hand and foot when it comes to its ability to act. Its only real duty is to maintain a base level of government, to keep things running, to keep the schools running, and to provide law enforcement and contract enforcement. And that appears to be, well, it. Beyond, of course, waging wars, which is difficult for an individual to do for very obvious reasons. Heinlein himself veered from liberal to libertarian over the course of his life. Oh, he veered harder than that. Both a pioneer for racial equality and a big fan of Ayn Rand. The 1959 book seems to reflect some of his more conservative, I love the way they, like, conservative, as if it's a special word that needs picking out there. Leanings, glorifying the military and seeming to endorse its conceit that suffrage was only achieved through military service. At the time of its release, many critics described it as fascist, although it is likely fair to say its exact political leanings were deliberately obfuscated. No, its political leanings were not obfuscated at all. In fact, the entire book was written in a weekend, I think, specifically because of the end of nuclear testing in America. This was Heinlein pouring out his perfect system. This was, in essence, a political YouTube video of the 50s and 60s, in essence, in a relatively sellable and marketable format, you know, relatively speaking. It is explicitly political, as it outlines, again, Heinlein's preferred idea of a system. And it is utopian, no doubt, in my mind whatsoever, as the military comes across as very nice in that one, and all military people are super duper huggy-wuggy and do their best to continue the system, right? Also, it's not only through military service, it is implied in the book that there are other ways to achieve it, and even Heinlein himself stated it, obviously, later thereafter, though he could have made it clearer in the book, I guess. Verhoeven certainly had no time for it. According to Empire, the director was quoted as saying, "I stopped after 2 chapters because it was so boring," he added. "It's a very right-wing book." 2 chapters in, there's not really all that much right-wingism in Starship Troopers. And that he asked the movie's writer Ed Neumer, Robocop, to summarize the story for him to save reading through it. I think the first chapter is an attack on the skinnies, I think, and then Rico's early life, maybe the school scene with Ratchek, I think. Like, there's not a whole lot of right-wingism in the first 2 chapters, genuinely, unless you consider the statement, force is the supreme authority to be right-wing. Whereas, most humans consider that to just be a literal observable fact of reality. Oh well. That was in the movie too, wasn't it? I think so. Previously, Norman had been trying to get a script developed with the amazing title Bug Hunt at Outpost 7. So this was kind of the excuse why it was made. And that movie, there's a bit of confusion on this. I don't actually think that was ever made to be Starship Troopers, because I think that was made into Starship Troopers 2, which is an absolutely god-awful movie that I highly recommend you ignore as thoroughly as you possibly can achieve. The result is extraordinary. Satire is almost always the most successful and employed subtly. Ah yes. See, we've kind of evolved from this. The original response to Starship Troopers was, "Don't you see, it is a fascist film." And moved on to do, "No, it's satire of fascism, you buffoon. What wagon did you live underneath?" Until finally, the rest of us looked at him and like, this doesn't actually have anything to do with fascism or Nazism, which is what you're actually implying when you're, literally looking at their clothing and going, it's Nazis. It was a story about a monstrous future where citizenship and suffrage was only earned through federal service, where humans launched brutal attacks on the planets of insectoid creatures derisively called bugs. It was irony written on a sledgehammer, and yet apparently still too subtle for you to get, wasn't it? As it's not a monstrous future, in fact it seems to be an extraordinarily prosperous future. It seems to be one in which most people are living very nice lives. Rico's parents are filthy fucking rich. Neither of them have the citizenship. In fact, they don't have the franchise, and they are proud of it. They try to stop Rico from joining up, and it is an act of youthful rebellion for him to do so. And humans launch brutal attacks on the planets of insectoid creatures? No. Again, this is one of those moments where you're wondering if the person in question read the book and watched the movie, or if they simply again went to one of the previous articles and copy-pasted it. As the movie makes it very clear that the attacks for the bugs attack first. The first scenes in the movie is a flash forward, in essence, as indicated by Johnny Rico on Clendatho, about to get eaten by an arachnid. And then you move back, and you see Johnny Rico as a kid, and you wonder, how did this work out? The bugs attacked first, and the Mormon colonists, as is often a counter-argument, they were not Federation. In fact, this is an example of the Federation's non-intervention policy. The Federation says, don't go there, this planet is goddamn dangerous. The Mormon colonists, electing to ignore the Federation's advice, went there regardless and got murdered by the bugs, who launched a completely one-sided genocidal attack on them, not bothering to communicate or negotiate in the slightest because, well, they kinda don't do that. Ever, in fact. And then they launch a bug meteor against Buenos Aires, which is a mass civilian casualty event, of course. Then, and only then, does the Federation strike back, attempting to decapitate the arachnids in one blow. And again, this isn't even a surprise thing. The Federation knew about the arachnids for ages. There is even an example of a dissection of an arachnid sand beetle in biology class, where the teacher is praising them as the perfect organism, right? The negative fan response from Heinlein's fans is understandable. For those who enjoyed it as a fascist work, I do enjoy the fact that a little bit earlier, this is probably the copy-paste here, a bit earlier, it's like, the book's politics are so difficult to understand. I just can't parse them. Fascism. The Control-C, the Control-V is getting more obvious. It was a film that directly contradicted this message, boo-hoo. For those who refuted this interpretation, it was a film that so broadly deviated from its source material as to be an insult. And that I do agree with to an extent. In terms of the action and the characters and who they're fighting, and in terms of the complexity of the situation, absolutely, and there's no power armor, obviously. But as a spiritual interpretation, it's actually not a bad one, as Verhoeven, through sheer bloody accident, actually got most of the politics of the Federation correct. And Starship Troopers was, again, I remind you, written as a political essay rather than a piece of science fiction. But the wider critical response remains utterly bemusing. No matter how obvious it was, I do love, it's like, I do love the blank-faced ignorance here as well on display. How overtly over-signal it was every aspect of his lampooning, reviewers still thought it was a pro-fascist screed. It is deeply embarrassing. Oh yeah, author, it definitely is. Paul Verhoeven told the AV Club how the Washington Post wrote an editorial calling it fascist and the writing and directing were neo-Nazi. The same purpose, Stephen Hunter wrote that it was Nazi to the core, adding it's spiritually Nazi, psychologically Nazi, it comes directly out of the Nazi imagination. The best part here is back in 2007, people had an even looser grasp of what the definition of Nazi is, which actually explains the interpretation, because even today, if you ask the average lefty to define Nazism, the definition is as, I've forgotten his name now, for some reason. Author of 1984. You know who it is. He said that the definition of Nazism in modern Britain, and that was like in the 90s or 80s, was basically just bully. And that was it. And you know what? Yes, that is as serviceable a definition of Nazism as exists in the modern-day English vocabulary. Bully. As pretty much everyone's actually forgotten about the actual ideals of Nazism and fascism, two separate entities. The cruel irony of this, in fact, the abject monstrosity stupidity of it, was that Verhoeven, born in 1938, grew up in Nazi-occupied Holland. Well, we can talk about certain other people who grew up in Nazi-occupied Holland and decided to borrow a bit too much for the Jeff from the Nazi playbook. Looking at you, European Union. It's a film that really holds up. Hell, it's a film that has never fallen out of relevance since its release. See, the last paragraphs here are just like praising it. And you know what? They're completely correct. The CGI holds up. Practical effects mostly. The action holds up. The acting holds up. The characters holds up. And as for its relevancy, yeah, weirdly enough. See, Starship Troopers' relevance is built on its misconception, which is the beauty of it. For the left wing, this is a satire of fascism, and no matter how obvious it isn't, no matter how blatant the book is written to not be fascistic in the slightest, to have the most hands-off state imaginable, they will not be moved from this position. They have fully ensconced themselves in it like a nesting baby bird, somehow. And as for the rest of us, we're looking at this, laughing at the left all along, and going, yes, this seems to indicate that what we should have is a society in which citizenship is more than merely a residency on the clay that you happen to be born on or moved to. In fact, there should be civic duty tied to it, or more correctly, really, it's not the duty in and of itself that's the important part here. The duty in and of itself is nothing more than a service. That's irrelevant. It is the virtue of civic duty that Heinlein is really pushing here. Because you can be of service all you like. That in and of itself doesn't make you better than anyone, and it certainly doesn't make you better to service the country as a nation, as a politician. What federal service is intended to get out of you is the virtue of self-sacrifice. It is the virtue of working for others. It is the ability to put others before yourself. Not in a communal sense, not in a collectivist or communist sense, but in a this is the society we wish to uphold sort of sense. And federal service is your way of demonstrating the ability and, more importantly, the will to do so. And that is why federal service is so hard. It isn't about enduring it. It is about recognizing the message, the teachings that it's trying to give you. It is about constructing that virtue. And there are several virtues involved in this. The virtue of discipline, the virtue of strength, the virtue of not only self-reliance, but reliance on others in your squad and team as well, etc., etc. It is a brilliant book whose only flaw is the fact that it just fucking stops. It just ends. Seemingly in mid-sentence, seemingly mid-plotline, it just stops being a book and asks you to waffle off and jerk off somewhere else. And again, it is because it wasn't intended as a sci-fi book. Really, it wasn't intended as a piece of entertainment. It was intended as a political scree, a political essay in essence. And apparently we are going to continue to misunderstand both book and movie for, well, if this article is an indication, another 10 years or so. But hey, I appreciate the fact that at least in theory, Kotaku, of all places, is willing to defend, at least in spirit, Starship Troopers. It may be a baby step, but it is a step in the right direction. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I do hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day.